I never thought I'd be sitting in a bank's office on a Tuesday afternoon, staring at paperwork that made my blood run cold. 53 years old, and I felt like I was watching my life fall apart in real time. The bank manager, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a serious expression, slid a folder across the mahogany desk. My hands were shaking as I opened it. $1 million in debt, under my name, my daughter, my only child, the person I raised alone after her mother left, the person I spent every single night worrying about, every penny I earned going toward her future. And she had done this. "Mr. Henderson," the manager said carefully, "we've traced the initial fraudulent activity back about 14 months. Your daughter applied for multiple lines of credit using your social security number. She opened accounts, took out loans, even attempted to refinance your home. The good news is we caught it before the mortgage application went through, but the damage is significant." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe right. My vision felt foggy, like I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold, not my own. Let me back up. Because this didn't just happen out of nowhere. This was the culmination of years of me being blind. Years of me choosing to see the best in my daughter when the evidence was right there, staring me in the face. Sarah turned 28 last month. She lives in a nice apartment in the city, one I helped her get. She drives a Range Rover, a birthday gift from me 2 years ago. She works as a graphic designer, makes decent money, has friends, goes on vacations. By all accounts, she has a good life, a life I helped build for her. But somewhere along the way, it wasn't enough. I grew up poor, really poor. My father left when I was 5, and my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep us in a small apartment in Newark. I wore the same 3 shirts to school and prayed nobody would notice. I told myself that if I ever had kids, they'd never feel that way. They'd never go without. They'd never feel the shame of being the poor kid in class. So when Sarah was born, I made a promise. I worked my ass off. Construction, then real estate, then my own business. By the time she was 10, I'd made it. Real money, security, the kind of life I dreamed about as a kid. And I gave her everything: summer camps, private school, a car at 16, college tuition without a single loan. I never said no to her, not once. When she wanted money for a trip to Europe with friends, I gave it to her. When she wanted to move to the city right after college instead of getting a job, I co-signed her apartment lease and paid half the rent for the first 2 years. My friends would joke about it. "You're too soft on her, man. She's taking advantage." I'd brush it off. I'd tell them they didn't understand. I was doing this right. I was breaking the cycle. I was being a good father. But the truth that I was too scared to admit to myself, she was taking advantage. She'd been taking advantage for years. It started small. She'd ask for money, and I'd ask what for. She'd give me some reason: car repairs, medical bills, emergency with a friend, and I'd transfer it. No questions asked after a while, because asking questions felt like not trusting her, and I needed her to trust me. I needed her to love me. Then it got bigger. She asked me to add her name to one of my credit cards, just for emergencies. I did it. She maxed it out within 3 months. When I confronted her about it, she cried. She told me she'd been going through a rough patch, that she felt ashamed, that she'd pay me back. I told her it was fine, that family helps family, that I wasn't angry. I was angry, I was furious, but I swallowed it because I couldn't stand the thought of her being disappointed in me for being disappointed in her. The apartment she lived in, the one I co-signed, had a maintenance issue. The landlord was taking forever to fix it. She called me at work, upset, saying she couldn't live like that. So I told her to find a new place, and I'd help. Within a month, she was in a luxury building downtown, $1,500 a month. I didn't blink. I just paid it. When she saw the Range Rover in the dealership window, her face lit up. She didn't ask. She just said, Wouldn't it be amazing to drive that? And I heard what she was really saying, buy it for me. So I did. $72,000. Financed it in my name, added her to the insurance. Every single time I did something for her, I felt this strange mixture of pride and emptiness. Pride because I was providing, because I was being the father I never had. Empty because deep down, I knew this wasn't love. This was transaction. This was me buying affection from my own daughter. My ex-wife saw it. She'd call sometimes to check on Sarah, and she'd ask me why I was letting our daughter walk all over me. I'd defend myself, defend Sarah. At least I'm here, I'd say. At least I'm trying. And she'd sigh and hang up. My business partner Mike tried talking to me about it too. Why does she need a Range Rover? Why does she need you to pay her rent? She's an adult, man. Let her figure it out. I'd get defensive. I'd tell him he didn't understand, that he wasn't a parent, that you don't just cut your kids off because things get hard. But I wasn't trying to protect my daughter. I was trying to protect myself. I was trying to make sure she never felt the rejection I felt as a kid. I was trying to buy the unconditional love that I never got from my own parents. And I succeeded. I just didn't realize the price I was paying. 6 months before the bank called me, Sarah started acting different, more distant. She'd come to Sunday dinners, the tradition I started when she was little, the one thing that was just ours. And she'd be on her phone the whole time. She'd leave early, say she had plans. She stopped calling to ask for money, which I told myself was a good sign. Progress, maturity. What I didn't realize was that she didn't need to ask anymore. She'd already figured out how to take it without asking. She must have memorized my social security number at some point. Maybe when she was helping me with taxes one year. Maybe she looked it up when she was home visiting. I'll never know. But she knew it. And she knew that I'd always been too trusting, too eager to believe the best of her. The first fraudulent account was opened under her name and mine at a credit union across town. She took out a $30,000 personal loan. The paperwork showed my signature, but it wasn't my signature. Not really. She'd practiced it enough times that it was close enough to fool them. Then she did it again. And again. Different banks, different loan amounts, different credit cards. By the time the bank's fraud detection system finally flagged the unusual activity, she'd accumulated over $900,000 in debt, and she was planning more. The mortgage application for my house, the house I'd worked for 25 years to own, was about to go through. She was going to refinance it, pull out the equity, and disappear. Sitting in that bank office, I did the math in my head. The house was worth around $800,000. If that application had gone through, she would have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars more. She would have bankrupted me completely. She would have left me with nothing but debt and the hollow, devastating realization that my own daughter had destroyed my life. What happens now? I asked the manager, and I barely recognized my own voice. It sounded old, tired, defeated. We're investigating, she said. The fraud is clear and your daughter's involvement is documented. We'll need you to file a police report. There will be legal proceedings. The good news is that your identity is protected as the victim, and we'll work with you to dispute the fraudulent accounts. But you'll need a lawyer to handle the financial implications and to separate your accounts from hers. A lawyer, a police report, criminal charges against my daughter. The words felt surreal, like I was hearing them in another language. I walked out of that bank office into the afternoon sun, and I felt like I didn't exist anymore. Like the person I was, the man who would do anything for his daughter, who believed in family above all else, who thought love meant sacrificing everything. That person had died, and I didn't know who I was supposed to be after that. The police report took me 2 days to file, 2 days of sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone, knowing I needed to make the call, knowing that once I did, everything would change. My daughter would have a criminal record. Our relationship would be permanently destroyed. The life I'd spent 28 years building, the life centered around being a good father, would be exposed as a lie. But I had to do it, because the alternative was losing everything. The detective assigned to my case was a man named Rodriguez, maybe 50 years old, with tired eyes that told me he'd seen this kind of thing before. Not the specific crime maybe, but the betrayal. The family turning against each other over money. It happens more than you'd think, he told me when I first sat down in his office. Parents and adult children, it's usually the same story. The kid's in debt, wants a lifestyle they can't afford, sees the parent as a source with no real consequences. They convince themselves that they're entitled to it, or that they'll pay it back eventually, or that the parent won't press charges because of the relationship. That part's almost always wrong. I wasn't going to press charges, I heard myself say. I was going to find another way, pay the debt back somehow, work it out, try to get her help with whatever she's going through. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair and studied me. You're a good man, Mr. Henderson, but your daughter committed multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, forgery, attempted mortgage fraud. Those are serious crimes. And if we don't hold people accountable, even our own families, it just enables them to do worse things to someone else. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to defend Sarah even now, but something in me had shifted. Something had cracked open in that bank office, and I was finally starting to see clearly. My phone had been blowing up since the bank contacted me. The alerts started coming through: declining credit applications, fraud notifications, frozen accounts. I'd also received a call from my accountant, who'd heard through some financial network that there was suspicious activity on my accounts. By the time I confirmed everything with the bank, the news was spreading. My business partner Mike found out. He called me, concerned, ready to help. When I told him what happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your daughter did this?" he asked, like he needed me to confirm it, like it was too insane to be true. "Yeah," I said. "Jesus, man, I'm sorry, that's a lot. What are you going to do?" What was I going to do? I had no idea. I was still processing the fact that my only child, the person I loved more than I'd loved anyone in my entire life, had deliberately and systematically tried to destroy me financially. "I'm filing a police report," I told him. "I don't really have a choice." There was another pause. "That's the right call," Mike said finally. "I know it's not what you want to do, but it's the right call. I'll help you however I can. Lawyer referrals, talking to our accountant about the business implications, anything. You're not alone in this." But I was alone. In a way that mattered. I was completely alone. I called my ex-wife, Sarah's mother, that same night. She deserved to know what our daughter had done. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "David, is everything okay? Is Sarah all right?" "Sarah's fine physically," I said, "but I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down." I walked her through it. The fraud, the debt, the police report, all of it. By the time I finished, I could hear her breathing, measured and controlled, the way she always breathed when she was trying not to fall apart. "I told you this would happen," she said quietly. "I told you years ago that you were enabling her, that you were setting her up to feel entitled to things she hadn't earned. I told you she needed boundaries, and you wouldn't listen." She was right. God, she was so right. And hearing it said out loud, hearing the "I told you so" buried underneath the concern, made me feel even more ashamed. "I know," I said. "I know you did." "What are you going to do about her?" my ex-wife asked. "Are you going to press charges?" "I have to," I said. "It's already in motion with the police. I don't know if I can stop it even if I wanted to." "Good," she said, and I heard the firmness in her voice. "Good, David. Because she needs to learn that there are consequences for her actions. She's 28 years old. She's not a child. You can't keep protecting her from the real world." We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been hollowed out. Everything I'd believed about myself, about being a good father, about the power of unconditional love, about sacrifice, felt like it had been built on sand. The lawyer I hired, a woman named Catherine Price, was direct with me in a way I appreciated. During our first meeting, she laid out the financial damage clearly. "The fraudulent debt is significant," she said, "but because it's fraud, you're not legally responsible for most of it. The banks will write off what they can't recover, and your credit will take a hit, but you won't be paying back $1 million personally." "So what's the worst-case scenario?" I asked. "Worst case? Your daughter goes to trial, is convicted on all counts, and serves time in a federal prison. Your relationship with her is permanently damaged. The stress of the legal proceedings affects your health or your business. The media picks up the story if it's sensational enough. But financially, you're going to be okay. You'll recover." I nodded, but I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I was thinking about my daughter sitting in a prison cell, about the fact that I'd be responsible for putting her there, about whether I'd ever be able to forgive myself for that. "There's another option," Catherine said, like she was reading my mind. "She could take a plea deal. Depending on the evidence and the prosecutor's recommendations, she might avoid jail time if she cooperates fully and agrees to restitution. But that's not really my call to make. That's between her and her lawyer." So I waited. And while I waited, Sarah didn't call me. She didn't reach out. Apparently, she'd figured out that I knew, and she was running. It took the police 3 weeks to locate her. She'd been staying at a friend's apartment in Brooklyn, apparently trying to figure out her next move. When they brought her in for questioning, I was informed but not present. I didn't want to see her. I didn't know if I could handle seeing her. But then, 3 days later, Sarah called me. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since before the bank appointment, and I almost didn't answer. "Dad?" she said when I picked up, and she was crying. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and desperate, and I ruined everything, and I know that I ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I listened to her cry, and I felt nothing. That was the moment I realized how badly she'd hurt me, not in the financial sense, but in the part of me that loved her. That part felt dead, numb. "Why did you do it?" I asked quietly. "Because I was angry," she said. "I was angry that you gave me everything and that it was never enough. I was angry that you were always there, always fixing things, and I wanted to prove that I didn't need you. I wanted to prove that I could take care of myself, but I couldn't, and instead of just asking you for help like a normal person, She trailed off, sobbing. "You stole from me," I said flatly. "You committed felonies. You tried to destroy me." "I know," she whispered. "I know that now. I didn't really believe it would come to this. I thought maybe you'd find out and be angry for a while, and then we'd work it out like we always do." And there it was, the real issue. She'd been betting that I'd let her off the hook, just like I always had. She'd been counting on my weakness, on my inability to hold her accountable, on the fact that I loved her too much to really hurt her. She was wrong. "I've hired a lawyer," I told her. "You need to do the same. And Sarah, I'm not paying for it. That's on you now." There was silence on the other end of the line. Are you really going to let them prosecute me?" she asked, like she still couldn't believe it. Like she still thought there was a way I'd back down. "Yes," I said, "I am." "But you're my dad," she said, and her voice sounded small, broken. "You're supposed to protect me." "I protected you your whole life," I said. I protected you from consequences, from disappointment, from the real world. And look where it got us. Look at what you became because I was too weak to ever tell you no." I hung up before she could respond, and then I sat alone in my apartment, in the house I'd spent 25 years working to own, and I finally let myself feel the weight of it all. My daughter was facing criminal charges. My life savings were being depleted by lawyers and accountants. The life I'd built with her was over, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, I was relieved, because somewhere in the process of losing her, I was finally finding myself. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not physically. It was a comfortable 72 degrees, air conditioning humming quietly in the background, but emotionally, spiritually cold. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you feel like you're watching your life from outside your body. Sarah sat at the defense table with her lawyer, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, who specialized in white-collar crime. Sarah looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she was wearing a grey blazer and black pants, the costume of remorse that Jennifer had probably coached her into. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I was afraid that I'd either break down crying or feel nothing at all, and both options terrified me. The prosecutor, a man named Thomas Chen with sharp eyes and a sharper tone, laid out the case methodically. He presented the evidence, the forged documents, the fraudulent loan applications, the bank records showing pattern after pattern of theft and deception. He had printouts of my daughter's text messages to friends where she casually mentioned needing money and joked about her father's endless wallet. He had screenshots of her browsing luxury real estate listings, planning a future that was being built on the foundation of my financial ruin. Each piece of evidence felt like a small knife, and by the time Chen finished his opening statement, I felt like I'd been stabbed 1,000 times. Jennifer Martinez's defense was weak, and I think even she knew it. She argued that Sarah was impulsive, that she'd acted out of emotional distress, that the amount of debt had spiraled beyond her control without her fully comprehending the consequences. She painted a picture of a young woman having a mental health crisis, not a criminal mastermind. It was all true in a way. Sarah probably was struggling emotionally, but that didn't change what she'd done. It didn't undo the months of calculated deception, the multiple fraudulent applications, the attempt to take out a mortgage on my house. The turning point came when I took the stand. Chen walked me through the timeline. "When did you first realize something was wrong, Mr. Henderson? How much money had you given your daughter over the years? Did you ever suspect she was committing fraud? How did you feel when you learned the truth?" I answered each question carefully, not looking at Sarah, focusing on the facts. But when Chen asked me about my relationship with my daughter, something broke inside me. "I gave her everything," I heard myself say, and my voice was shaking. "Everything I had. Because I grew up with nothing, and I never wanted her to experience that. I never wanted her to feel like she wasn't enough, like she didn't deserve the best things in life. And I think I confused love with enablement. I confused protecting her with letting her believe there were no consequences for her actions. And I think that's partially my responsibility for what happened here." There was a moment of silence in the courtroom. I could see the jurors exchanging glances. Chen leaned in slightly. "You feel responsible for your daughter's crimes?" he asked carefully. "I feel responsible for not teaching her the difference between wanting something and being entitled to something," I said. "I feel responsible for not setting boundaries. I feel responsible for letting her believe that love meant I'd fix everything she broke. But no, I don't feel responsible for her choosing to commit fraud. That was her choice, her decision. I didn't make her do that." When Jennifer Martinez cross-examined me, she tried to paint me as a cold father who'd abandoned his daughter in her time of need. She asked why I was willing to prosecute my own child. She asked if I regretted giving her the love and support that any parent should give. I don't regret loving her, I said quietly. I regret not loving her enough to tell her no. I regret not loving her enough to let her fail. I regret not loving her enough to hold her accountable. That's the love I regret not giving her. When I stepped down from the stand, I finally looked at Sarah. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I felt the old impulse rise up in me, the need to comfort her, to fix her pain, to make it okay. But I pushed it down, because making it okay was how we got here in the first place. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, and by the time both sides rested their cases, I think even Sarah's lawyer knew how this was going to end. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back with a guilty verdict on all counts, identity theft, fraud, forgery, attempted mortgage fraud, I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. My daughter was a convicted felon. Because of my testimony, because I'd refused to protect her from consequences. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. Jennifer Martinez argued for leniency, citing Sarah's lack of prior criminal history, her youth, the fact that she'd allegedly shown remorse. She asked the judge to consider rehabilitation over punishment, to recognize that Sarah had been struggling mentally and emotionally. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a face that had seen too many cases like this, listened carefully. Then she sentenced Sarah to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years if she demonstrated good behavior and completed rehabilitative programming. 5 years. My daughter would be 33 when she got out. A third of her life would be gone. Sarah stood up when the sentence was handed down, and she looked at me directly for the first time since the trial started. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy with tears. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry, Dad." And I felt nothing. That was the worst part. I felt like I should feel something. Rage, grief, satisfaction, anything. But there was just emptiness. Like someone had reached into my chest and removed the part of me that knew how to love my daughter. I left the courtroom without responding to her. That night, I sat in my apartment and thought about the father I used to be, the man who would have done anything to keep his daughter out of prison, the man who would have thrown himself on the mercy of the court, begged the judge for leniency, sacrificed his own financial security to pay her debt. That man felt like a stranger to me now. Mike called me the next day. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I feel like I should feel something, guilt, relief, triumph. But I just feel empty." "That will pass," Mike said. "You did the right thing, the hard thing, but the right thing." "Did I?" I asked. "My daughter is going to prison because I testified against her, because I refuse to enable her anymore. What kind of father does that make me?" "The kind of father who teaches his daughter that actions have consequences," Mike said. "The kind of father who loves his daughter enough to not destroy her by saving her from everything. Look, I know this is hard, but you need to give yourself permission to move on from this. You need to let her deal with what she created, and you need to start rebuilding your life, rebuilding my life." The words felt foreign. I'd spent 30 years building a life around my daughter. What was I supposed to build now that she was gone? I took some time off work. Catherine Price, my lawyer, handled the financial aspects of cleaning up the fraud. The banks worked with me to dispute the fraudulent charges, and while my credit took a hit, I wasn't going to be bankrupted by Sarah's crimes. My house was safe. My business was stable. Financially, I was going to be okay. But emotionally, I was adrift. I started going to therapy. A man named Dr. Sullivan, patient and perceptive, who helped me start untangling the knot of guilt, shame, and unprocessed grief that I'd been carrying. "You're grieving," he told me during one of our sessions. You're grieving the relationship you thought you had with your daughter. You're grieving the role you defined yourself by, the good father, the provider, the protector, and you're grieving the version of yourself that you were before all of this happened. Can people come back from this? I asked. Can I ever have a relationship with her after this? Maybe, Dr. Sullivan said, but not right now. Right now you both need space. She needs to sit with what she's done and understand the choices that led her to prison. And you need to figure out who you are when you're not defined by her needs, her failures, or your attempts to fix either of those things. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. I threw myself into my work, into rebuilding the parts of my life that had been neglected while I was busy enabling my daughter. I reconnected with old friends. I traveled, something I hadn't done in years because I was always too busy managing Sarah's crises. I went to Costa Rica for 2 weeks and sat on a beach and read books and let the sun warm my skin. I went to dinner with Mike and some colleagues, and I realized I could have conversations that weren't about my daughter, my guilt, or my failure as a father. I was becoming someone new, someone I didn't recognize yet, but someone who was slowly, painfully starting to heal. 6 months after Sarah's sentencing, I received a letter from her. It was forwarded through the federal prison mail system, and I almost didn't open it. I almost threw it away unopened. But something made me sit down at my kitchen table one Sunday morning and carefully tear open the envelope. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. Prison issue paper. She'd probably written it a dozen times before deciding on the final version. Dad, it began, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I need to try because I think if I don't, I'll spend the next 5 years drowning in my own self-pity and anger, and I'm tired of being that person. I kept reading. I've been in here for 6 months, and it's been the hardest 6 months of my life, not because of the conditions. The prison is actually decent and I have a good cellmate, but because I'm finally starting to understand what I did. Not just the crime, but the deeper thing underneath it. Why I was so angry at you that I'd betray you like that. She went on to describe her therapy sessions. Apparently the prison had a mental health program, and how she'd been working through a lot of resentment that she didn't even know she had. She talked about feeling smothered by my generosity, about resenting the fact that she could never measure up to the gratitude she thought she owed me. She talked about how she'd convinced herself that stealing from me was a way of taking her power back, of proving that she didn't need me. But I was just a kid in a grown woman's body, she wrote. I was acting like a rebellious teenager, not an adult. And when I finally got caught, and you stood there in court and didn't protect me like you always had, it was like the ground fell out from under me. Because for the first time in my life, I realized that my actions had actual consequences. Real consequences, not just you being disappointed for a while before you forgave me again. I had to stop reading for a moment. I got up and made coffee, my hands shaking slightly. When I sat back down, I finished the letter. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness, she continued. I don't think I deserve that. I'm writing this because I think you deserve to know that what you did, what I hated you for at first, was actually the most loving thing you could have done. You let me hit bottom. You didn't catch me when I fell. And as much as that destroyed me, it's also the only thing that could have saved me. She went on to detail her prison routine. She was working in the prison library, which she'd chosen specifically because it gave her time to read and think. She was taking online classes through a program the prison offered. She was staying sober and attending support groups for people struggling with impulse control and entitlement. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she wrote again, emphasizing it. I'm asking you to take care of yourself. I'm asking you to live the life that I prevented you from living while you were busy taking care of me. I'm asking you to be happy, Dad. Not for me, but for you, because you deserve that. The letter ended with her name and the date, written in the same neat, careful handwriting. I sat with that letter for a long time. I read it 3 times. By the 3rd read, I was crying, not the angry, devastating tears from the courtroom, but something quieter, sadder, more resigned. I didn't respond to her letter immediately. I sat with it for a week, then 2 weeks, then a month, because I needed to know what I actually felt before I tried to communicate it to her. What I finally understood was this: I could forgive Sarah. I could even eventually have some kind of relationship with her, but I couldn't go back to being the father I was before. That man was gone, and I think both Sarah and I needed him to stay gone. I wrote her back. A letter that was honest but not cruel, that acknowledged her progress but didn't absolve her of responsibility. I told her I was proud of the work she was doing in prison, that I believed she had a chance to rebuild her life if she stayed committed to changing. I told her that when she got out, we could try to have a relationship, but it would be different. It would be based on mutual respect and boundaries, not on my willingness to sacrifice everything for her. I told her I loved her, but that love looked different now. It looked like holding her accountable. It looked like allowing her to fail. It looked like being a father who was also a complete person with his own life and his own needs. 2 years later, when Sarah was up for parole review, I wrote a letter to the parole board. I didn't ask them to deny her parole. Instead, I outlined her progress in the prison program, her commitment to rehabilitation, and my belief that she was genuinely ready to re-enter society. I also outlined my own boundaries, that she would need to live independently, that I would not support her financially, that our relationship would be rebuilt slowly and carefully if it was rebuilt at all. She was granted parole after serving 2 years and 8 months of her 5-year sentence. The day she was released, I agreed to pick her up. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Some kind of grand reunion maybe, or some closure to the chapter of my life that had been defined by her. Instead, when she walked out of the prison gates, I barely recognized her. She looked older, thinner, like something essential had been stripped away from her. She got into my car and we drove in silence for a while. "Thank you for coming," she finally said. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. "You're welcome," I said. We drove some more. "I got the apartment," she said, "like we talked about. I'm starting a job on Monday. It's not glamorous customer service for an online company, but it pays the bills. I'm not asking for help. I have enough saved from my prison work to cover the first month's rent." I nodded. "That's good. That's really good. I'm seeing a therapist," she continued, "twice a week, and I'm in a support group for people struggling with impulsive behavior and entitlement. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm trying, Dad. I'm really trying." "I believe you," I said, and I did. I could hear it in her voice, not the false contrition she'd shown in court, but a genuine recognition of the work that lay ahead. We talked more as we drove. She asked about my business, about Mike, about whether I was seeing anyone. I wasn't, but I was open to it, which felt like progress. I asked about her plans, her interests, what she'd learned about herself in prison. It wasn't a warm conversation. There was no hug, no dramatic reconciliation, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, honesty felt like more than enough. That night, after I dropped her off at her apartment, I sat in my living room and thought about the journey I'd been on. 2 years of legal proceedings, of therapy, of learning to live as a man defined by more than just being a father. 2 years of discovering that I could set boundaries, and that setting boundaries didn't make me a bad person. 2 years of understanding that sometimes love meant letting go instead of holding on. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who would have done anything to keep his daughter out of prison, and I realized that man had to die so that both Sarah and I could live. My phone buzzed. A text from a woman named Jennifer, someone I'd met at a book club and had been slowly getting to know over the past few months. "How did the pickup go?" she asked. Want to grab coffee and debrief? I looked at the text and smiled. This was my life now. Not defined by my daughter's crises or my need to fix her, but by my own choices, my own growth, my own possibility. I texted back, "Coffee sounds perfect. Meet you in 20 minutes?" As I got ready to leave my apartment, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked tired, yes. I looked older, definitely, but I also looked like someone who was finally learning to be okay with his own imperfection, his own limits, his own humanity. For the first time in 30 years, I was building a life for myself instead of around someone else, and it felt like freedom.